From UFOs to psychic powers and government conspiracies, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now or learn the stuff they don't want you to know. A production of iHeartRadio.
Hello, welcome back to the show. My name is Matt.
My name is Noel.
They call me Ben. We're joined as always with our super producer, Andrew the Triforce Howard. Most importantly, you are here. That makes this the stuff they don't want you to know. You know, guys, we were talking, a little while back off air. We've spent quite a bit of time recently exploring present and future conspiracies. And folks, with so many bizarre and troubling events occurring, who can blame us? Like Noel, Matt, Andrew, have you guys checked the stock market recently?
Nope.
I looked at it this morning.
I'm good.
As of April 7th, it was way down.
Yep. Mm-hmm. You know what, though, y'all? We've sorry, I hate to be silver lining guy. It's very bad, but we have lived through these kinds of corrections and recessions before. And, you know, I just remember at the time the last big recession happened, my mom sold all of her stock, which was a really dumb thing to do because that's when you actually, show the loss. So if she had just sat on it, it would have been fine because it all came back around. But no, what's going on right now is bonkers.
That's why we love Casper mattresses. It's a great place to store that cash.
No, Matt, keep the cash. Keep the cash, but don't panic sell your stock. That's all I'm saying.
As well as, of course, Hellman's mayonnaise jars. Hellman's mayonnaise jars, set it, forget it, bury it in your yard.
Or just your couch. Coinstar that down the road.
Put it in your couch or your Casper mattress. That's where you put the jar. Then you bury it in your yard.
Mm-hmm. So then it turns into kimchi in a couple of months.
So we're clearly top-level financial advisors, but we are counseling people about the importance, of staying calm, right? In chaotic times. And that's a question that we're going to explore in this evening's episode when the nation of Australia and indeed the world panicked because imagine, all right, we're in chaotic times right now. Some people love the current U.S. president. Some people are not fans of the current U.S. president. What if one day he went swimming and disappeared?
I mean, some people might feel various ways about that in one direction or another. But yeah, it certainly would be a big news item.
You mean like in the band, One Direction?
Exactly that. That's exactly what Good save.
No, but for real. And imagine if the sitting president of the United States was very well liked. Like just all around, pretty dang high approval rating.
Mm-hmm.
And
folksy guy. Yeah.
Yeah, imagine if that occurred. Like there wouldn't be much other news coming out besides where'd the president go?
What happened? Yeah, and this evening we're diving back to. You'll see why that's a bad bit of wordplay in a minute. We're diving back to our roots with a classic mystery, some classic stuff they don't want you to know. A disappearing prime minister. This one is for you, fellow Aussie listeners from down under. What happened to Harold Holt, and why do so many conspiracies about his disappearance abound today?
We'll find out right after a teeny tiny quickie word from our sponsor.
Here are the facts. All right, who's Harold Holt? This name might not be familiar to a lot of our fellow listeners outside of Australia.
Well, Harold Edward Holt was born on the 5th of August, 1908 in Sydney, Australia. Both of his parents were teachers, and he had moved around quite a few times, and by the age of 12 had lived in Sydney, Adelaide, and Melbourne, where Holt ultimately finished school.
Yeah, and he is not a guy coming from a silver spoon background. You know what I mean? He's not the scion of some multi-generational mining dynasty or anything of that nature. He's not an aristocrat. He is a very smart kid, and he's a very popular guy at school at the University of Melbourne, where he studies. He's known for being an avid outdoorsman, a real sporty guy, but he's also great at debate club. He cleans up, and he studies law, as did many of his colleagues at the time. He graduates in 1930 with a law degree, and he starts working for a local firm before he passes the bar in 1932 and becomes a full-fledged lawyer. He's only 24. We do have to give points to the name of his very first legal employer, or his very first law firm, Fink, Best, and Miller.
Great name for a law firm.
Fink? I don't know, man.
Is his first name Rat? Like, I mean, that's, yeah.
Is it different with the accent, though?
Maybe it is. Maybe it's more like
how would that be? I don't know.
I don't know.
Is fake.
It would be. It'd have to be something with a vowel.
It's true.
Right?
Beast? Miller?
Miller?
I don't know.
Beast.
Kind of cool.
Watch out for bits. So... Unfortunately, as we know, as history proves, he becomes a lawyer at one of the worst times to enter the job market, the Great Depression. So this bore a little bit of homework for us because he was not able to make a living as a barrister. Here in the United States, when we say lawyer, we usually mean a barrister, or what people in the Commonwealth would call a barrister. That's the person who goes to court and represents clients or has specialized legal advice. Because he couldn't make a living this way, he was, he's crashing in boarding houses. He was asking friends for money. He had to go into business instead as something called a solicitor. They'll handle legal matters outside of a court, and they often do all the legal homework for the barristers. So it's kind of like how you'd have a teacher and a parapro.
A paralegal,
if that makes sense.
Right? Yeah. Is this the same as in the UK? I guess I've always thought that the barrister and solicitor were interchangeable. This is interesting.
Yeah, this is our understanding. We'd love to hear more from legal experts in the Commonwealth, which has, a couple different rules of the legal road. But in short, either way you look at it, it was a less auspicious job. Times were tough for everybody during the Depression, other than the folks who, caused the Depression. However, his father at this time and moved on. He was no longer a school teacher. He was now working in the world of entertainment. He was managing theaters. He was partnered with some radio concerns. And these contacts in the entertainment industry, combined with Holt's affable nature and his gregarious approach to things, they made him a great success. He took a job as secretary of the Victorian Cinematograph.
I don't know. I probably overdid it, but that's fun. That's a tough one.
Their Exhibitors Association. So he was the secretary of a film industry lobby, and while he was working in this capacity, we see him cultivating relationships with a lot of politicians, a lot of up-and-comers, a lot of celebrities and public figures as well.
So let's pause here just to remember some of the stuff we've learned about the entertainment industry here in the United States, where, these films oftentimes are so expensive, it's difficult to fund all of them. So funding comes from other places, often private investment in a particular film or in, let's say, a certain company that is making a bunch of films, right?
Sure. Or sometimes international investment.
Sometimes international investment, sometimes, not always, obviously, but sometimes that money comes from places that, maybe they want you to pay them back and they want to make a little money off of this thing.
A little vigor each. Yeah.
Maybe that money was under the table or was made from means that wouldn't be above board.
Right. Or wouldn't pass the domestic financial regulations of Australia, which is why we have to point out international investment, planting a seed, watering that one a little.
All that is to say, this part of his life is kind of key to some of the conspiratorial thoughts that exist around his disappearance.
Yeah. And shortly after passing the bar, he inculcates himself in this industry and all the connections it provides. He also enters politics in a big way, which is a natural transition, right? Or a natural evolution. He joins the UAP, the United Australia Party, and various subsidiaries thereof.
The original UAP?
Exactly.
The original UAP, perfect. And he repeatedly and unsuccessfully runs for office until 1935 or so. That's when he snags a role in Parliament. This leads to even greater success. Here in the U.S., we often use the phrase career politician as a insult, right? As a denigrating remark. But he is a career politician. He's 27 when he goes into Parliament, and he spends 32 years in office. Yeah. Okay. And people like him. People dig him.
Well, yeah, and he is also just one of those names that, imagine hearing the same politician's name for 35 years, right? So like when you're a kid learning about politics, you hear the name. Now you're older, you've got your first job, you hear the same name in politics. Even if you don't know this person, right? You just hear him talking and talking and talking. It's a kind of name like a Nancy Pelosi here in the United States.
Sure. Or Strom Thurmond.
Yeah, you don't know that much about them, maybe necessarily even personally or what they stand for, but you know they're there and they've been there. So it's almost like, I don't know, there's that familiarity thing that makes people
household name
like things. Politics, yeah. Or maybe not like things, but when you have that familiarity, it's almost as though you're more likely to have a positive view on it.
Yeah, perhaps, right? Better the devil one knows. He also has great PR. Maybe part of that is due to his understanding of the entertainment business. He's an avid outdoorsman, right? So there are photo ops of him like spearfishing. He doesn't want a bunch of security because he feels it alienates him from the common voter. And he has all these outdoor adventures. He's a likable guy.
So on January the 26th of 1966, Harold does go on to become the 17th Prime Minister of Australia. And this sort of caps off what many would consider a logical trajectory in his astonishing rise to power, his successful traversing of the political ranks. So maybe like you could maybe even say a positive version of that career politician, maybe, right? At least he's liked, right?
Yeah, he starts from the bottom. He's seen as an everyman. He's erudite, but he's not a nerd. He's physically fit, but he's not a jock or a meathead. He's somebody who has something for every voter.
Yeah, he's like the John F. Kennedy type figure in some ways, wouldn't you say?
Well, yeah. Mm-hmm. But I think this fact that he goes out, I mean, he is a spear fisherman. Towards the end of his life, he was just talking about going on spearfishing trips. He's like, "Oh yeah, let's actually go spearfishing in a couple of days, or maybe tomorrow. Let's go spearfishing." And this is an older gentleman. Like, that's just cool.
It's also, it reminds me of, there's that kind of soft touch diplomacy that you see in some Western political figures. Like, I can't remember. I think it was in Ireland. There's a guy who's famous for always bringing his dog to everything.
That's cool.
Yeah, and I get it, right? But another.
But this isn't like going, I'm not a big avid golfer. No, man, I spearfish.
Exactly. Right. Yeah, golf also has a different vibe here in the States. It has for a while. He does spearfish though. He's about that life, and people are starting to ask themselves, what an amazing, thoroughly Australian success story. What sort of legacy will Prime Minister Holt imprint upon our land? What kind of changes could this everyman's administration make for the world? We will never know. It's about 22 months after he attains office when Harold Holt disappears. To date, as we record on Monday, April 7th, 2025, he has not been seen since. Officially. So what happened? We'll tell you after a word from our sponsors. Here's where it gets crazy. I think we have to begin by thanking an author named T.R. Frame who wrote the book, The Life and Death of Harold Holt. So this is one of the best primary sources to read all the twists and turns and context here. And a lot of the work you'll see is actually quoting that book.
Yes, and let's also shout out the National Film and Sound Archive of Australia, as well as the National Archives themselves of Australia, because they've got the original documentation on all of the stuff that everything's built on, the original reports that came from, both the Commonwealth and from the news media at the time.
Not to derail too much, but I just think it's so neat, the idea, I state the obvious, of like, what was Australian cinema like in the 60s and 70s? It's just a world that's completely, other than like Mad Max and Priscilla Queen of the Desert and maybe a couple other Australian films that are more modern. Like, I have no idea, but there must have been a rich culture of cinema for them to have an organization like this. And now it makes me really want to kind of dig in to that world and find out who was like the Coppola of Australia, you know?
Ooh, the Coppola of Australia. I like that, Noel. That'd be a good one to check out. Do tell us, folks. And what did Harold Holt like to watch?
Exactly.
So we know that we know that he did love the outdoors, but obviously he would have to be a fan of cinema as well. When he disappears, he is with a group of friends, and they're swimming at a beach. We'll attempt the pronunciation: Cheviot Beach, Cheviot.
I want to shout out Morgan Kurajong, I think is how you would say it, on YouTube. Just found a random video. He's out there and he calls it Cheviot Beach.
Cheviot Beach, which is an accent question. That's funny because I linked the same video in the episode here.
Oh, for real?
Yeah, he describes it as the most dangerous beach in Australia.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I love that guy.
Well, and that's saying a lot, considering how dangerous Australian wildlife can be and just how, untamed much of it is. What made it so dangerous? Just like treacherous and rocky and things like that?
Yeah, let's talk about its location, get into the beach. So it's near Portsea, Victoria. When we're talking danger here, a lot of the danger comes from the currents, rip currents, which they can appear deceptively calm, but even experienced swimmers can be challenged or find themselves in a situation going quickly sideways on this beach in particular.
Yeah, so imagine you're pretty far into shore when there's a low tide, and you're looking out at the sea, right? On Cheviot Beach. To your right, there is basically a very rocky beach, and to your left, there is a very rocky beach. And then in the center, it's nice and sandy, or much more sandy and clear, and going out. If you're hanging out in that area with the sandy beach where humans would want to go, and hey, it's a lovely beach, I want to swim out there. There are two pretty intense currents just beneath the water because of the rocky beaches there to both the right and left. If you get caught up in one of those, you're getting sucked right out to sea.
Yeah, and the beach is actually, its namesake is an iron steamer that wrecked on the beach because of these currents back in 1887, and 35 people died.
Yep.
So it's kind of like anytime you go to a place that's named after a disaster that occurred there earlier, tread lightly, step carefully, walk right.
Yeah.
Swim.
The other thing is the tides. The tides are pretty intense when it comes to changing what's happening beneath the water. At a high tide in this beach, it becomes much more treacherous.
Well, at this point, he's 60 years old, right?
He is. Yeah. At this point, he's around 60. His disappearance grips the country. It makes national and then international news within 24 hours, obviously, because it's, like we were saying at the top, imagine if your country's prime minister, president, ruler simply disappeared. That is somehow more challenging and disturbing than an assassination, as tragic as an assassination can be. This results in a massive manhunt. We know a little bit about the timeline. You can find this extensively researched and documented. I found National Archives of Australia to be a great source for this, but you walk through the timeline and every source you see says, this is a normal day for this guy. Like, he gets up, he goes to the general store, he talks with his wife. He thinks the weather's nice. He's going to go on an excursion with some friends. It's very much not anomalous.
Sounds like a lovely life, honestly.
Yeah.
Oh, dude, it's awesome. Where he is staying, he knows all the neighbors, right? Imagine this is the prime minister. He knows all the neighbors. He's just popping by neighbors' houses to have, a quick drink and hang and listen to some stereo music, which is what's said in the report by the Commonwealth there.
As opposed to mono music?
Well, yes, but he's stopping by other neighbors' house. When he goes to that store you were talking about, Ben, that's when he talks to the store owner, and just says, "Hey, let's hang out later at your place," which happens to be his neighbor's house. He's just like living his life, almost like on a little bit of a vacation schedule.
Yeah, and so it makes sense then, logically, that he would go and do. I like that idea of a vacation schedule, Matt. He would logically then go do things people do when they're kicking back and relaxing. And as a guy who loves to swim, that's on his list. He's near the shore. It's go time. We know he was especially excited, he and his friends were excited about seeing a then famous sailor named Alec Rose. Alec Rose was circumnavigating the globe on a sailing trip. Pretty neat stuff, pretty impressive. So as he is going around the world, he's going to make a stopover in this area. And that's kind of their main impetus to go to the beach that day. And Holt is there with several friends. They're not high muckety mucks or foreign dignitaries. He's with a lady named Marjorie Gillespie, her daughter, Viner Gillespie, her boyfriend, Marjorie's boyfriend, Martin Simpson, and one of his buddies, just one of his homeboys named Alan Stewart. You can also see reports that he had some bodyguards with him, which is interesting because for a long time, before some unpleasant events, he had rejected bodyguards. Like full stop. But after a couple of attacks and some close calls in his career, he later rescinded that and did have a little bit of a security detail. So he was not alone on the beach. There's no audio, there's no video given the time frame, but there were multiple eyewitnesses. Another important piece of the story.
Well, and as we've alluded to, this guy was a seasoned outdoorsman, and let's just call him a strong swimmer, y'all. This was something he had done many times before, and like you said, Matt, it was kind of just another day in the life for this man, and he had specifically swum at this beach despite all of the warnings around its very, very strong rip current.
Yep, it's stated by his friends who were there that he mentioned specifically, quote, "I know this beach like the back of my hand." Mm-hmm. And he also noted that, the tide is unusually high, as in it's even at high tide, it's not this high usually.
Right, yeah. And at this point, as you had mentioned, Noel, Holt is around 60 years old. So like so many world leaders, his age and undoubtedly the stress of his position had caused contributed to some health issues. In earlier months, he had collapsed due to what doctors suspected was either a vitamin deficiency or possibly a heart condition, and he had genetic predisposition to that in his family. And in September of that same year, he had begun treatment for an old, painful shoulder injury that he got during his youth as a footballer. And this wasn't, debilitating to him, but it did require him to be on a regimen of physical therapy and painkillers. And what do you need when you swim? Good shoulders.
That's right. And I mean, he had folks in his inner circle and his medical care staff that were, certainly warning him against this type of strenuous activity and some of the potential dangers of it. But, he was a guy who was very confident in his abilities, and he didn't seem to listen. Maybe you could argue he was a little hard-headed about it.
It's probably one of those things where you say, "Okay, doc, I hear you. You worry too much." You're telling me not to go try not to try to swim to China. I get it. But I can go, take a dip. I could take a lap, right? I know this water like the back of my hand. It's kind of like saying, I think we interpret that kind of medical advice in very similar ways. Even now, your doctor might say, hey, don't do too much of this. And then your head says, okay, so I can play a little tennis. You're telling me not to compete for Wimbledon, right? So there's a matter of degree there. And it's not a surprise that despite the slightly higher water level, Holt decides to take a dip. In fact, he may have been somewhat excited to see it. It may have made it feel more adventurous. One of the people in the crew, a guy named Alan Stewart, says, okay, man, all right, homie, I'll go with you into the shallow water, right? Just off the shore. But no one in his entourage, including Alan Stewart, will venture further away from the shore. Nobody wants to go with him, so Harold Holt goes solo. And the folks who watch him go into the water end up being, as far as we know, the last folks to see Harold Holt alive. Let's go to a quote from the Smithsonian. I think this is just a great summation of this.
Absolutely. Holt's 4 companions climbed a rocky cliff and searched the water for traces of him. Finding none, they began to panic. Stewart went for help, and within minutes, 3 scuba divers were wading into the water.
It continues, but the undertow was too strong even for them. That's the scuba divers who were then going to look for him. And the currents made the water turbid and difficult to see in. They retreated from the surf, climbed a rock, and scanned the water with binoculars until police and search and rescue teams arrived.
Mm-hmm.
And it should be noted here that even the search and rescue teams, once they arrive, even the other, they call them skin divers in some of the reporting here, when everybody is there attempting to look for wherever the heck Mr. Holt went, they cannot even continue their search effectively because
it's too
of
dangerous,
these things.
right?
Danger, the waters you can't see in, and basically the conditions in general of the water.
Right, which are also ever changing. When someone disappears in water, especially this kind of situation, it's not impossible for, as cold as it sounds, it's not impossible for the body to quickly disappear or be washed away. And there's another part in the Smithsonian article, just love the writing on this, where it seems to imply that of the people on the scene, Marjorie Gillespie is the last to actually see Holt. She keeps an eye on Holt as he swims further away, quote, drifting from them until the water seemed to boil around him and he disappeared. That's the part that stays with you, because that turbid water, that description just shows us how violent and chaotic the tides and the currents were becoming.
The movement of the water also makes me think of a potential animal attack or something. If he's that far out and then you see a lot of bubbles or something happening below him, like it could mean that something came up and pulled him down, at least initially. And if you're that far out, it's going to be difficult to see if he's then under the water being attacked.
And if you already have a shoulder injury, then an injury that you could have swam away from might be debilitating to the point where you lose motion.
Well, and if I'm not mistaken, the same rip tides that would, carry you out in that direction in the first place would do the very same to any remains.
It is interesting to me with a shoulder injury, because it's reported in the National Archives when the Commonwealth did the investigation that he played tennis the Saturday before he went missing. Right. And if anyone who's ever played tennis, that's your shoulder, right? I mean, that's everything is in your shoulder. And I believe the quote from Dr. Bruce Edwards, that's the person they played with, he said Mr. Holt didn't play up to his regular standards, and he did complain of his shoulder, but he still played tennis just fine. Right.
Like that's what we're saying with the swimming too, you're aggravating an injury too when you're engaging in that repetitive motion.
To me, it sounds like something that would be really painful if he had to swim. It would hurt really badly, but he would still be able to do it. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Yeah. And this is, these are some of the many questions that have been asked over the decades since 1967. However, once 5 days had passed, and searches were still continuing, right? Investigations were still continuing, but the nation is a nation, right? And so 5 days have passed. Holt is declared gone, and Australia continues with the business of government. But perhaps the most important question, one that has been asked in multiple ways, multiple times ever since that day in December, is this: what happened? So we're going to pause for a word from our sponsor, and we'll dive into the theories.
And we're back. So, guys, what actually happened to Holt? Do we know?
He disappeared at sea.
That's for sure. We know that.
We know that. We know that
Yeah.
the Australian government has, ever since their initial investigation, including inquest as recently as 2005, they have always concluded the explanation is that Holt disappeared, didn't just disappear at sea, but drowned by accident, and that led to his death. This is understandable. Again, it's a notoriously dangerous stretch of beach, even for experienced swimmers. But this happens in so much conspiracy lore. Given Holt's high political position, the pivotal role of Australia in global governance, the tense issues of the region and the time, it's no surprise that there were alternative theories that would arise to explain his vanishing, especially because to date, no body has been recovered.
Yep. There was a lot of talk at the very beginning, like we're talking early January 1968. People were thinking, well, is it possible that Mr. Holt decided to swim out there knowing it was dangerous, knowing that his life was in danger, and knowing that he would likely die? Like, as in, did he do this on purpose?
Right. The possibility that he may have taken his own life. And this is initial scuttlebutt, right? It's a lot of speculation that, as we can imagine, would be tremendously offensive to friends and, more importantly, family. The proponents of this idea were saying, I have it on good record, or I have it on anonymous record, that Holt was depressed, perhaps mentally unstable in the months leading up to his disappearance, that for one reason or another, he felt his political career was damaged or inherently doomed. And
so let's go really quickly to the Canberra Times in 1968, January 22nd. And this is right after the official reporting is released, the one that the Commonwealth puts together. So all the police working together with the investigators, all of the, initial witnesses, anybody that interacted with Mr. Holt basically weeks before his disappearance. They make a very, let's say, strong point to talk about how Mr. Holt was his normal self at the time. They go to a lot of those initial witnesses who say things like he, quote, was in good spirits in his usual jovial mood. Another person, Mr. Edgar, says he was in excellent health and spirits. And then even a doctor who examined him on Friday, December 15th, just days before he went, said, quote, there was no reason, either physical or mental, that could cause or contribute to his death under ordinary circumstances.
Additionally, it made no statements to that effect to friends or family. He had shown no what you would call suicidal ideation. And even though, some of the quotes that are rallying against this at the time, their attribution is not super great. There is a uniform stance in the media and in statements from neighbors and friends, because he knew a lot of people, and they're all saying this feels like unfounded speculation. But to jump in time a little bit, if we're exploring by theory rather than by chronology, this idea or this theory of suicide is still around right now, most particularly because in 2007, Australian network called Nine Network aired a made-for-TV documentary about the disappearance called Who Killed Harold Holt? And in this documentary...
Bit of a loaded title, right? I mean...
Right, yeah, you're right. And in this documentary, they treat claims of suicide with, I think, more credence than they should. And when people hear that claim, despite being initially dismissed, when they hear that claim being given so much credibility decades later, the average viewer might say, quite possibly. And so many Australians, or so many viewers, we should say, who saw this, started thinking along this line or giving sand to this theory that living friends of the missing Harold Holt and his family rallied in strident reaction. And I always just exercise empathy. It's got to be terrible for your father to disappear. This is something Sam Holt had to deal with. Your father has disappeared. All of a sudden, decades later, you're still dealing with this trauma. Some network airs a show that says your dad killed himself, and now you have to go back on air and say, hey, thanks for bringing this up. Also, as we always said for decades, no. I mean, that's a terrible thing to do to anybody's family.
Yeah. To me, it feels like, no offense, guys, and to myself as well, a bunch of producers sitting around saying, what's juicy about this Harold Holt story that we could make a whole thing on?
I mean, it's all in the title. It's pretty
exactly as
yellow
you said,
journalism.
It's the title, right? It might be Frankenbiting. It's gross. And as we said, the police always disagreed with the suicide theory. Every reputable source that you will find, and even some disreputable sources, spoiler, disagree with that theory. But it's not the only theory at play. A second one, which doesn't get, I think, a whole lot of attention, is the possibility that Holt was somehow murdered, that maybe someone sent him out to the water, and that's based on the small number of eyewitnesses. That's also based on the fact that there's no audio or visual recording, and that's based on the fact still that they haven't found the body. So that's really just a hall of mirrored unknowns, I would call it.
But again, like I really like Matt's animal attack theory with the bubbling waters and stuff. And again, that riptide, I mean, it would be highly unlikely they'd find the body.
Just to contradict myself, it feels as though there would be more evidence. Floating debris of clothing.
That's true.
Blood,
something left.
Something.
But man, that riptide though, it sucks everything out. I mean, maybe, it's pretty intense. Maybe it wouldn't have left a shred behind. But I'm with you, Matt. I'm with you.
The inquest, again, they looked at the possibility of animals too, and they found bupkis.
We do know that on a lot of shores of Australia and a lot of beaches and places, it is very dangerous to be swimming out in the water because of the specific species of sharks that populate a lot of those waters,
or just the jellyfish
and the jellyfish and the snakes. Really, just anything. Spiders. No, but I guess what I mean is, I remember recently, guys, and I can't remember exactly what it was. I think it was an episode of Radio Rental or something that I just watched that talked about the extremely dangerous waters in Australia in a bunch of places that you wouldn't expect to be dangerous. Like this place, if you just came upon it, especially back in the day when there were steps going down into the water, it looked friendly, like a place where people could just go swim if you wanted to. You just wouldn't expect, oh, no, there's like a pretty good chance you die here.
If you just happened upon it, you're from out of town, you haven't spoken with the locals, you don't have, the internet or something like that, sure. And that's probably led to deaths, not just in this area, but in multiple areas of the world, right? It's easy to underestimate the dangers of the shore and the ocean, or just water in general, because humans, despite being built of water, humans are not built for water. It's probably the best way to put it.
I think those were tiger sharks, by the way, the ones that I'm thinking about from that specific
Radio
episode.
Rental? Okay.
Yeah, I think so. It was like just where tiger sharks exist. Not in this beach that we're talking about today, just a beach that you wouldn't expect there's a ton of sharks below the waters.
Yeah, or the tricky little guys who hide under the sand. Yeah, they're waiting for you to step on them. Another, perhaps one of the more bizarre theories here, or the bizarre set of theories, is that Harold Holt did not die at all, but rather, instead of purposely dying, he purposely disappeared. And there are a few versions of this one. And one, Holt fakes his death. He's going to commit pseudocide, start a new life under an assumed identity. None of these, I think, the general ones are fact-based. They have all the trappings of a gripping story, high politics, celebrity. Like Aesop Rock would say, fast car, danger, fire and knives. But to make a theory like this really zing, you got to throw a little bit more into the cauldron, right? So how about this, right? What if for the entirety of his political career, the Minister of Australia, Harold Holt, was a spy? He was an asset.
That would be cool. Imagine?
I mean, for people who didn't live in Australia, it's a cool story. But, could you imagine, just guys, hypothetically, how terrible it would be for a country if its leader was the asset of a foreign power?
That would be really strange. I wonder how you would figure that out.
Yeah, I'm just saying, hypothetically, I think that would be a chaotic time to be in.
It'd be a weird time. Tariffs everywhere. Wait, what?
Imagine that.
Imagine that.
It's almost too absurd to even consider.
Yeah.
There we go.
Like, jumping in there, becoming prime minister, destroying the economy.
Yeah. Doing things that are purposely against the interest of the people. Yeah,
I don't know, dismantle all of the stuff that helps the country.
Yeah, right? Oh, boy. So this is the pitch. This is a real pitch made by a British author named Anthony Gray. In his book, they published in 1983, named In a Burst of Creativity, The Prime Minister Was a Spy.
Once again, man, they're really on the nose with these titles.
Yeah, exactly.
Not leaving much to the imagination here.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Let's go down the rabbit hole a little bit, guys. What if Mr. Holt was indeed working for China the whole time?
Which is crazy because China had a bit of a sea change themselves as a government over the time that Holt would have been an asset. It was a nationalist government, and then you may have heard about it. It became a communist government. So this book would argue that he was a spy for both versions of the Chinese government.
Interesting.
Somehow, right. The most spectacular claim is that Holt was depressed. Despite what everybody says to the contrary, Harold Holt was depressed, but he wasn't depressed because his career was over. He was depressed because he knew people were catching on. He would be exposed. So instead of resigning and risking prison, he faked his own death. He swam in waters known to be extremely dangerous, made statements about how he knew the waters were dangerous, and when he went under the water, he secretly boarded a submersible stationed off the coast. It was a Chinese craft that would take him to Beijing, and he lived out the rest of his life in comfort and obscurity, never contacting his children, never contacting his wife, never contacting any of his best friends, or even, picking up the phone when people called.
Well, Ben, you sadly were on adventures when we talked to Maggie recently about Up and Vanished Weekly, and the idea of pseudocide came up. And in fact, Maggie mentioned that book that you're always referencing, Ben, and I'm totally losing the
name. By Elizabeth Woods.
That's the
Plain
one.
Dead.
1,000,000%. And just once again, how incredibly challenging, dare we say impossible, nigh on impossible it would be to unalive yourself in that fashion.
Most people mess up because they ask for money or they reemerge for a personal contact.
Mm-hmm. Look, guys, I want to get back into the China thing because, as you said, Ben, we're talking about the differences and the changes in China that occurred like 1949 on when the Republic of China is declared to be the People's Republic of China. But then the Republic of China, that was still recognized by a lot of other countries, including the United States. And I do not know, but I am assuming probably Australia. The Republic of China, that power is still recognized, but as seated in Taiwan.
Yes.
So that concept of during that time, we're talking 1967, right? End of 67. There is potential there for spycraft to, I don't know, exist. I don't know. It feels less and less that weird to me. I guess just the fact that he's an acting prime minister feels a little weird, but just both of those powers on the Republic of China and the People's Republic of China, both those powers wanting to have high level spycraft activities.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's also, there is a tricky thing here past the umami of the story, which is at that level of state power, when you're the prime minister, you're already wrapped up in a bunch of espionage stuff. You know what I mean? You
may not even know it.
Yeah, you might not even know it. Like, how vetted is your cook? How vetted is your secretary? These are the questions. So it sounds like a really good story, but it gets even weirder when we learn more about Anthony Gray, the author. He's alive today. He used to work for Reuters. He's a novelist. He's a journalist. He's in his 80s, I believe. He knows China pretty well, or at least the inside of Chinese prison cells, because he was captured and locked away there from 1967 to 1969. So the year Holt disappears, this guy is also disappeared, right, behind the Great Wall. And he gets out of prison in 1969. In May of 1983, Anthony Gray, per his own reports, he gets a call from an anonymous source who essentially says, "I'm staying anonymous. I know what happened to Harold Holt."
He had a delay on his voice and everything.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Really
Kick him with some reverb, when you're going anonymous. But so that's this guy that he contacts. We now know his anonymous source, and the anonymous source puts another twist into the story.
That's right. He was later identified as one Ronald Titcomb. Titcomb? Whatever you like. A former Royal Australian Navy officer with quite the rap sheet, quite the dirty jacket, as you put it, Ben. He'd earlier left the Navy in order to avoid a court-martial, because he was a real naughty boy.
Whoopsie. Oh, and he also, after leaving the Navy, he had a lot of financial problems. He kept attempting to create businesses that would fall into disrepute. He had a lot of debts that he found very challenging. When you're looking at people's credibility, sometimes you do have to look at their finances. So critics of Gray's book will say that Titcomb is we'll say that Titcomb is out to make a quick buck off of this tragic disappearance, and that no matter what you believe happened to Harold Holt, this book itself is not going to be, it should not be your prime source for information. The idea is, okay, there are multiple claims in here that can be proven factually inaccurate. The pitch is that the story begins in 1929. Holt is he's a student, right? As we said, he's at the University of Melbourne, and one of his research papers comes to the attention of the Chinese government for some reason. And then he gets recruited by the Melbourne Chinese consulate to write pro-Chinese articles for a trade publication. That's what they're saying. And Ronald, I'm just going to call him Ronald. You get in my head with Titcomb. Ronald is saying that he discovered this story after a civil servant from Iraq tipped him off, and then he gradually pieced it together after meeting with different Chinese government officials who, for some reason, told him the story. That's the other question. Like, what? I don't know. I don't know. I mean, like, okay, so to the question you had, Matt, about what we're talking about working during the Chinese Communist Revolution, which side do you choose? Apparently, he becomes a sleeper agent, which meant he would just continue along his bureaucratic political path for a while, and then they would tell him when he needed to send a memo, right? Or needed to leak some info. But he was too valuable. He was too good. So they reactivated him because of the chaos happening in China. And the Taiwanese side paid him in 1952, but then in 54, he said, no, I'm a communist sympathizer. So he switched the party to them. Like the whole story is an allegation of him hopping back and forth across the lines of conflict there. And ultimately, he gets to escape. He gets to escape in a submarine. I don't know. I don't see it happening. And I got a little too weird with this. Like, what was submarine technology like at the time? How many subs did they have? Did they have the wherewithal to just go pick up this one guy who may have already expended his use? Because one thing governments are not great at in tradecraft is keeping their word.
It's very true.
There you go. There you go. This is making me think about something I haven't really considered in this case, and that is the JFK Lyndon Johnson of it all.
Right, because he did meet Lyndon, yeah.
Well, just this concept of the power vacuum that remains when a prime minister or president or somebody just departs suddenly like that, or is no longer in that seat. I wonder about the other powers that would fill in, right? Like who becomes prime minister after Holt exits, and what is that infighting like between even inside the same party, right? And then also the other parties like arguing, well, now this is a whole change. What do we do now? Who gets to decide? Do we have an election? Do we do this? What do we do? I just found something on the National Film and Sound Archive of Australia. It's from the Nine Network in 1967, and it's talking about Deputy Prime Minister John McEwen, MCEWEN.
Yeah, he becomes the caretaker prime minister.
Yeah, he's like he's kind of the Lyndon Johnson who's like, well, next in line, okay, you step in. You're now going to act at least in this position for a couple of weeks. I think it was only 2 or 3 weeks that he actually did that. But then there's also a treasurer named William McMahon, MCMAHON. And they were kind of fighting back and forth about who is actually going to get the power and why. And I'm going to leave if you get in there. Well, you're not ready for this and that kind of stuff.
Right. And their political anatomy is not as simple as the sort of two-party system we have in the U.S.
Coalitions, right? And all that.
Right. McEwen is the leader of what they call the Country Party. As you said, he's the caretaker prime minister, sort of the substitute prime minister from December 19th till, I guess, January 9th. Like you said, just a few weeks. And the Liberal Party has a leadership election. It gets into a whole thing that's, frankly, a little bit complicated for us Yanks because we only have the two parties.
Well, yeah.
That are allowed to run or succeed.
I honestly don't even understand how you put those pieces together and say, well, who's actually benefiting from any of this? Or, if you were looking at potential suspects for foul play or any of that kind of stuff, you need to know why, right? Who's the person who benefits? Yeah. So it just, I don't know enough about this. I've literally looked at it for a few seconds, but it doesn't seem like enough change occurred or enough. I don't know. It didn't seem like anybody benefited enough to point a finger, at least to my eyes.
Yeah, Gray Gorton becomes the 19th prime minister after a series of intense, what corporate America would call healthy conversations.
Yeah, but then didn't McMahon also get in there?
I believe that's correct. It's something that we would have to look into, I think, further in depth,
Yeah.
But that is an excellent, the most important part of that question, I think, is it shows us how many stakeholders there were, how many people would have been required to sustain a conspiracy if such existed. And it does look as though because of the extraordinary nature of this tragedy, people will continue to re-examine it. If we go to the report by the Commonwealth and Victoria Police from January of 1968, we see the following. There's been no indication that the disappearance of the late Mr. Holt was anything other than accidental. And then in 2005, a later inquest finds the same thing. It really does feel like this is a tragic example of man versus nature rather than man versus man. I don't know. What do you think? What do you think, guys?
Yeah. To me, at least that's what I've seen. After everything we've looked at, it does appear that somebody underestimated what he was getting into. He took a little dip, went out a little further. There's a mention in the Canberra Times back in 68 where they talk about his sand shoes that he was wearing didn't have laces on them. And everybody thought that was a bit weird. Like, why would you go out there in sand shoes without laces if you're going to actually take a dip in the water?
Also, what are sand shoes?
Also, what are laces?
Yeah,
don't know any of these things.
No. What are shoes? No, it's true, though, but it shows us people were scrambling for any sort of lead, right? Any sort of break in the case. This is a tremendous tragedy and remains so.
If you want to go deeper in this whole thing, you can find on the National Archives of Australia a PDF file of the contents of Mr. Holt's briefcase at the time of his disappearance, which is a really fascinating thing to go through. So it's all of the papers, all of the official documentation pertaining to both his work as Prime Minister and the human being, Mr. Holt, that are hanging out in his briefcase when he dies. And it's officially on record. And see if there's any rabbit holes you can find in there.
And we'd again like to thank T.R. Frame, the author of The Life and Death of Harold Holt. If you'd like to learn more, this is one of the best places to start. So thank you, Mr. Frame, for your tireless scholarship on this tragedy. We want to hear from you, folks. We want to hear your take, especially Australian conspiracy realists, but you don't have to be Aussies. We just want your thoughts. Is there anything you feel the investigations have missed? What do you make of these alternative theories? Let us know. We try to be easy to find online.
That's right. You can find us at the handle Conspiracy Stuff, where we exist on Facebook with our Facebook group. Here's where it gets crazy. Join in on the conversation. Have a ball. Make some new friends in the Conspiracy Realist community. You can also find us at that handle on X, FKA, Twitter, and on YouTube, where we have video content galore for your perusing enjoyment. On Instagram and TikTok, however, we're Conspiracy Stuff Show, and there's more.
You can give us a call. Our number is 1-833-STDWYTK. When you call in, give yourself a cool nickname and let us know within the message if we can use your name and message on the air. If you'd like to instead send us an email, you can. We are
the entities that read each piece of correspondence we receive. Be well aware, yet unafraid. Sometimes the void writes back. As a matter of fact, we're catching up with a few of you this very evening. What do we mean? Is it true? Do we actually write back? There's one way to find out. Join us here in the dark. Conspiracy at iHeartRadio.com.
Stuff They Don't Want You to Know is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.